Welcome to At Core. I'm Chloe Jackson, trainee counsellor, chronic overanalyzer, and someone who once thought staying calm during an argument made me emotionally evolved. Spoiler, it didn't. Emotional regulation is not about who can stay quiet the longest. It is about who can stay connected when things get messy. So today we are talking about dysregulation, what it looks like, where it comes from, and how to handle it with compassion and boundaries. And this is a topic that is very close to my heart. I probably say that every episode, but it truly is. Anything to do with relationship dynamics. You're going to find me very excitable, and you can probably tell the difference as I'm warming up throughout these episodes. I definitely feel more myself. And when these topics come up, dysregulation, patterns, boundaries, couples, relationship dynamics, I just can't resist, and I will probably end up with quite a lengthy episode. So feel free to scroll through to any parts of interest, but I will admit, and I will very unhumbly state that I actually think there are so many golden nuggets that we're going to cover in today's episode, because I am very passionate about this subject. And the reason being, I do have somebody very close to me who does suffer with emotional dysregulation in a relatively severe, can you say those things, those two words together, in quite a severe way. And it's an ongoing process. So it's something that I have, I would say, firsthand experience in. And also now a therapeutic understanding is obviously developing more and more. So let's kick off by looking at what emotional dysregulation really is. So let's start with the basics. So dysregulation isn't weakness, first of all. I would say that it is physiology, basically. I really struggle with some words. Sorry, it's quite late. I'm recording this. And when it gets past a certain time, my brain just and my mouth don't seem to connect. So it's physiology. It's what happens when your body's alarm system takes over. So your prefrontal cortex, which is the part that thinks clearly, goes offline, basically. And your amygdala, which is the part that screams danger, takes the mic. So it could be that the conversation that started with, "Can you please put your phone down?" suddenly becomes, "You never listen to me, you don't care." And this is what DBT, which is a form of therapy, which we'll touch upon later, calls emotional mind. So it's that sort of flood of feeling where reason drowns. So to give you a real life example of how the loop might look if you are with a partner who struggles with emotional dysregulation, and how that then can affect yourself or vice versa. Picture this. So your partner says something sharp and you snap back, and then they shut down, and then you chase. And in that situation, you feel rejected and they feel attacked, and then round and around that goes, which probably sounds very familiar because it is so common. Neither of you are actually arguing about the thing anymore. Most of the time, you're actually just both fighting for regulation. And that is actually the loop that most couples live in. So one person moves forward and one moves away. And unless someone spots it, it can spiral into serious disconnection. So spotting dysregulation in yourself and in the other person isn't hard to do once you know what to look for. So let's have a look at what dysregulation can look like. So in yourself, it could look like your speech speeding up or shutting down. It could be that your breathing changes. You may start catastrophizing, saying things like, this is hopeless. And one that's quite interesting is that you lose curiosity or humor. And that's usually the moment that the room gets tense. So in your partner, you might see agitation, defensiveness, or a sudden emotional shutdown. Sometimes they'll say, I just can't talk about this right now. But sometimes, and actually very often, they just leave the room altogether, or worst case, and I've lived through this many a time, they actually leave the house altogether or wherever you are. So the Gottmans call this emotional flooding. And they've sort of shown in research, so once the heart rate or the heart rates pass about 100 beats per minute, empathy goes offline completely. So, what may cause emotional dysregulation? And why do some of us go from calm to chaos so quickly? So, first of all, I will state it is rarely just about the moment. Most of the time, it's a real mix of biology, history, and then environment. So, a few things that can definitely cause emotional dysregulation, more commonly known, would be early attachment wounds. So, inconsistent caregiving, neglect, or emotional dismissal can really wire a nervous system to sort of expect abandonment. Trauma is another big one. So, especially relational or developmental trauma, which trains the body to overscan for danger. And then there's neurobiology. So, this is an interesting one people sometimes don't realize, but some people naturally have higher emotional reactivity. So, conditions like ADHD or PTSD or BPD can heighten sensitivity. And then there's one again, which is sort of like that silent killer or silent, not so much killer, but silent sort of assassin, which is stress and sleep. So chronic stress or a lack of rest lowers our regulation capacity massively. So our emotional window of tolerance literally shrinks. And of course, there's relationship dynamics. So when we're with someone who mirrors our old triggers, we can relive unfinished stories. So, in short, dysregulation is rarely random. It's often an echo, and it can be a combination of any number of those that I've listed. So, one thing that I researched into, which is very much like me to do when I was first dealing with said loved one who is emotionally dysregulated quite often, is if there is an emotional dysregulation scale. And the answer in short is kind of yes, though it's more sort of conceptual than clinical. So therapists often talk about a window of tolerance, which is a term coined by Dr. Dan Siegel, and it's a lovely sort of visual representation of an individual person's tolerance or levels of tolerance. So if you think of it like a scale, you have different zones. So I'll go through the different zones. So zone 1 would be somebody who's, when they're regulated, they're calm, they're connected, and they're able to reason and empathize. And then you go into zone 2, which is slightly activated. So there's some tension, some faster speech, irritability, and they're still reachable in this zone 2 with grounding. But obviously it's ramped up a little bit. And then zone 3 is flooded. Shouting, shutting down, crying, logic is gone. And then you've got the real scary zone, which is zone 4, which is disassociation or collapse altogether, numbness, withdrawal, and shutdown. So with the zones, the goal isn't to never leave zone 1, because let's be honest, that's completely unrealistic. But it's more to notice sooner when you're moving up the scale, and use regulation skills before you hit zone 3 and definitely zone 4. So awareness itself actually is intervention. Okay, so here now we're going to talk about something where it actually just gets really fascinating and hard. And that is this abandonment connection. Because underneath many dysregulated moments is actually abandonment fear, which is interesting to think about, because often the person who is the one being abandoned cannot imagine in the slightest that the person who is dysregulated and abandoning them in that moment feels any kind of abandonment fear, because they're the ones leaving. But it works in both sides. So it's that deep sort of cellular panic that says, you're about to leave me and I'm alone. So just to explain that a little bit more, we sort of have to look at attachment styles, which again, love looking at attachment styles, just honestly explains so many things in terms of relationship patterns, problems, issues. So we probably will be doing an episode on those. But for people with an anxious attachment style, dysregulation often looks like protest. So that might be crying or calling, texting, needing that closeness right now. And for avoidant types, it can look like withdrawal, disappearing, shutting down, or just going really cold. But actually, both are protective. Both are trying not to be left. So what actually happens is they're trying not to be left, but they end up recreating the very thing that they fear, which is emotional distance. So abandonment triggered dysregulation is particularly painful because it's pre-verbal. So what I mean by that is a lot is going on in the body all of the time. But with abandonment triggered dysregulation, the body remembers what it felt like to be alone or unseen as a child, and it actually reacts as if it's happening again, which is terrifying and deeply traumatic. And that's why reassurance rarely works, actually, unless it's embodied. And what I mean by embodied, I'm talking about bringing literally the body into the equation. So the slow tone, the soft eye contact, and the gentle pause. So you're not actually just calming a partner in that moment, but you're calming their nervous system's memory, which is like amazing and fascinating to me. But it obviously, when I say it like that, it sounds like a ginormous mammoth task, which feels like a lot of responsibility. And I'll be honest, as the person who I can't discount all accountability because it's a two-way street, but as the more emotionally regulated party within the dynamic, my personal dynamic, which I talked about before, it can leave you feeling quite resentful when you hear things like this, because often that person, not always, but often that person is the person who is sort of left feeling like they're holding all or most of the emotional weight of the relationship and the emotional sort of responsibility. And so when you hear things, or for me anyway, when I used to hear things like that, you're not just going to calm a partner, you're calming their nervous system's memory. Like that felt like such a huge responsibility, and almost just like another chore. Oh, great, I have to do something else to help them. But when you learn more and you understand that actually what's happening is it's relational, obviously. So how they behave and how they react triggers a response in yourself, and therefore you can most commonly become dysregulated as well, through sometimes no fault of your own. You start to understand the dynamics better, and you start to understand that it's in everybody's best interest, but namely for your own best interest, to calm your partner's nervous system's memory. And also then obviously the empathetic part of that, of actually understanding where that trauma comes from, is a huge learning curve, and a huge assistance in actually just coming out of that sort of resentment mode and stepping into compassion. So what can you actually do? So you can name it gently. So you might say, I think this might feel like I'm pulling away, but I'm still here. You can anchor with presence. So you can stay nearby if it's safe. You can use touch if that works with your partner, or grounding. And afterwards, debrief. But I do want to stress afterwards. So after it feels safe for both of you, and you can check in with your partner if that's the case. Talk about what abandonment feels like for each of you so that you can recognize it sooner. You might want to do that in the therapy room, if you do go to therapy. If you don't, it can be a little bit more tricky, but if you are in the habit of talking about this, or maybe you could introduce them to a podcast like this or something on dysregulation. I found that quite useful when somebody else explained what it was. My person was a lot more receptive to that than if I had, especially as a trainee therapist. It can sometimes feel a bit patronizing. And even if you're not a therapist or a trainee therapist, it can still feel a little bit condescending, I think, to be told that you're dysregulated. Nobody likes to hear that. So when we're talking about emotional safety, I really want to stress that that is the foundation. So if dysregulation is the storm, I like this analogy. If dysregulation is the storm, emotional safety is the roof of the house. And it's what allows people to express anger, fear, or sadness without being shamed or abandoned for it. So it may sound like, I'm not going to punish you for being human, or I can handle hearing your truth without retaliating, or maybe we can disagree and still be okay. And in therapy, this is called secure functioning, which is when both people protecting the relationship, both people are protecting the relationship while also expressing their needs. So can't stress enough the importance of emotional safety. And very often I find people dealing with a particularly dysregulated partner who experiences dysregulation frequently, especially ones from early attachment issues and deep set trauma. The partner of that person very often, I find, doesn't realize how emotionally unsafe they actually feel or have felt, up until the point of discussing it perhaps in the therapeutic safe space. And that makes sense if you think about what we've just said, because if you are in the storm of dysregulation and you don't have the roof to protect you, then you're actually unable to express that fear, sadness, anger. And so it plays a part for both parties. And that's why it's just so important to have the conversation and be transparent, and see how it feels for both sides. But to actually look at secure functioning, and for that to actually build secure functioning, you need three things. So number one, You need predictability. I can't speak tonight. I told you I'm very tired. Predictability. So that is consistency in tone, timing, and repair. And then you also need curiosity. This one is a tricky one, I find, because it involves being more interested in understanding than in winning. So it will sometimes require a bit of emotional maturity, a lot of emotional maturity, and patience. And then equally, the third one can be very difficult for people as well, which is accountability. So that's owning impact without collapsing into guilt. So predictability, curiosity, and accountability is what you need in order to build secure functioning. So what can you actually do in the moment? So people love, inside and outside of the therapy room, and myself included, love a practical tool, because that's when it counts in the moment, in real time. Logic will not fix dysregulation in real time, unfortunately, but nervous system regulation will. So I have a 5-step approach that can assist in the moment. So number 1, pause the problem. You might want to say something like, I think we're both getting overwhelmed. Can we slow down? Number 2, you can ground the body. So DBT's 5 senses grounding is a technique. I think we'll touch upon that in a moment, so I won't go in it now. Number 3, slow the breath. So you can inhale 4 and then exhale 6. Number 4, validate before solving. So you could say something like, I can see this really hurts. Sometimes that's enough. Number 5, repair if needed. I care about you and I want to talk when we're both calm. Now, I know they sound simple, and they are incredibly difficult to actually remember in the moment, and B, to implement, because they're so contrasting to probably a lot of the communication bouncing back and forth between you. But if you need to step away, you can make a repair statement, and just step away if that's easy to do in that moment. And that's not a retreat, that's actually respect. But I think you can listen back to those 5 and maybe jot them down, because it takes a minute to actually process those and to learn them, almost so that they become ingrained in your memory, so that you have them there as tools in the moment. And then also, I thought it'd be helpful to look at what to say. So I've got some regulating phrases that I've personally found very helpful. So when your partner's dysregulated, try phrases that actually soothe rather than fix, because you're not going to fix in that moment. So again, ensure that you're safe in the moment, but you could try something along the lines of, I'm here, we'll figure this out together. Or, you don't have to explain everything right now. One that I really like, which I really should try more actually, is, can I just sit with you for a minute? Because that sort of shifts the energy in the room. And then there's, you're safe, we can slow this down. I don't mind that one, but to be honest, I find that's more effective with my 4-year-old than an adult relationship, which again sometimes can sound a little bit patronizing almost, for certain people. So you could maybe try, let's pause, I want to understand, not argue, or this feels really intense. This I like. Do you want a hug or a breather? I really like that one for people who are physically inclined. So in terms of preferences like physical touch. Again, it can just change the energy in the room and that connection that you get from that physicality. So this feels really intense. Do you want a hug or a breather? And often that will just sort of collapse that dysregulation if done at the right time. Or you could say we're on the same side even when it doesn't feel like it. That one, I've had mixed reviews on that one. I mean, they sound simple, but all of those signal safety. So I just wanted to give you some options. And the nervous system really doesn't need eloquence. It just needs steadiness in that moment. So however you want to word it for you guys can work as long as it signals safety. And then, of course, there's the mirror moment, which we've touched upon, when you're the one who's now spiraling. So you need to regulate yourself first in those moments. And again, that's quite hard to handle all of these different factors at once. It may start that your partner is dysregulated, and then all of a sudden you're in this worked up state and you're the one spiraling. So in that moment, you can notice your body before your words and ask yourself, am I reacting to what's happening or of what this actually reminds me of? Because if it's the latter, that is the inner child and not the adult in you. So you can use grounding, breath, cold water, I really like. So it's quite an accessible, normal thing to do in the moment. Just go and grab a nice glass of cold water. Obviously there's breathing and grounding, but some people find it hard to get into that mode, whereas cold water feels more familiar and normal for people. Or you could simply just remind yourself, I'm safe and I can come back to this. And I think something really, really nice to remember is that regulation isn't self-betrayal. So like I said before, often for me anyway, there's been periods where I have felt like I'm betraying myself because feeling like perhaps I'm not getting my point across, or it's an unjust situation, or as I stressed before, that exhaustion of carrying the emotional weight of the relationship. But when you reframe that to yourself and actually understand that it's self-leadership and not self-betrayal, I'm all for promoting self-possession and the fact that we can't obviously change anyone else's behavior. We can't control anyone else's behavior. So we're bringing it back to ourselves all of the time, and how any experience that you're in affects you, your body, your health, and your mind. So in that sense, it's not betrayal, it's self-leadership. So before we wrap it up, I told you I would be going in depth. I just really love this topic because it is so close to home. And not only that, it is so common in the therapy room and in couples dynamics, so in relationship dynamics. So I really wanted to give you a bit of a rundown on the best therapies that you could explore if you do notice dysregulation patterns in yourself or in your partner. There are certain therapies that can literally be life-changing. So first of all, I will caveat that by saying any therapy is hopefully going to be beneficial, especially with dysregulation. But I will say, again, both from personal experience and from knowing the field a little bit better than some, there's definitely some that are going to be a lot better suited and perhaps get you some results quicker. So the first one would be DBT, which I've touched upon, which is dialectical behavior therapy. And that teaches emotional regulation, distress tolerance, and interpersonal effectiveness. And then there's CBT, which is more commonly known, which is cognitive behavioral therapy. And that can help to identify and reframe the thought patterns that fuel overreactions. There's also schema therapy. So you could look for somebody that specializes in schema therapy. It's great for abandonment wounds and repeated relational cycles. And then one that's getting a lot of traction of late, and rightly so, is EMDR, or somatic therapies. Quite a physical experience can be, and it addresses trauma stored in the body. And then, of course, if we're talking about relationship dynamics, we have couples therapy, so things like Gottman, or I'd focus more on emotionally focused therapy, which helps partners co-regulate, repair, and build safety together. So if you can find a therapist trained in these, that can help you to move from reaction to response, and from sort of firefighting to emotional fluency really nicely. And it might be something that you start as a couple and then go your separate ways on, or it might be that you do both at the same time, or it might be very much an individual experience, but the two can work alongside really nicely. And just on that co-regulate word, I just think that's such a powerful space to get to, where, again, a bit of reframing in terms of talking about dysregulation, which can feel very lonely for both parties. When you start working and being able to build together and co-regulate, it's really powerful for a personal relationship and that closeness between you. So to close, my sort of closing reflections on this, I didn't actually think I would ever close this, because it's just ongoing for me. There's so much that comes up. But at the end of the day, we are all just nervous systems trying to connect without scarring each other too much. And emotional dysregulation isn't a failure of love. And I'll be honest, I've spoken quite candidly about the fact I have personal experience of this, and there has been some resentment in the past. And it did at first, when dealing with it, sort of over and over again, did feel like a failure of love. But actually, over time, you come to realize it's a signal for repair. So the next time things get loud, remember, it's actually not about fixing your partner. It's about helping their body to feel safe enough to hear you again. Because actually, love isn't calm all the time, but it can be kind all the way through. So I'm Chloe Jackson, and this is At Core. And until next time, a gentle reminder to stay curious and to listen for what's really underneath the noise.